Oh, that's nice. All right, fellas, so more Prism goodness from the folks at Primary Arms, but is it really worth the upgrade from SLX? Well, sorta. Hey, what's going on, fellas? Welcome back to the channel. So speaking of welcoming back, we spoke about the Primary Arms SLX 1X Prism a couple years ago and really found it an excellent substitute for the traditional red dot since you could fine tune it to your vision. So of course, time has gone on and they've improved upon that model with their latest release, the GLX here. So just to cut to the chase, is this an upgrade from the SLX and is it worth getting? Well, in summary, I think these changes on the GLX are largely incremental. If the SLX was the version 2.0, then this version is really the 2.5. Don't get me wrong, the changes are definitely nice to have, but if you have the SLX now, it's probably not worth the upgrade. So to expand upon that further, let's look at it in more detail now. All right, fellas, so the first thing you're gonna notice as far as differences between these two are the profile and size changes. So if you were to look at a GLX and stack it up side by side with the SLX, you notice it's about a 1/4 inch longer. So as far as rail space, they're about the same, but you'll notice it sits a little bit closer to your eye just because it is a little bit longer. And because of that, the picture is gonna look a little bit bigger versus the SLX. Speaking of bigger, if you were to compare the weights between these, the GLX is about 1.5 ounces heavier. I don't think you'll be able to tell the difference. So Primary Arms is sending the same mounts for both of them. These choice of mounts and the directions to install them reads a little bit like a Lego manual where you're like, hey, mix and match each set of pieces to find out, hey, what height do I want and what cantilever, or i.e. the forward and backward on the rail that I want. So as you can see here, I chose the combo that will give me a lower 1/3 co-witness. But the only issue with that is if you want a lower 1/3 co-witness, the only thing available is the cantilever. There's no straight mount available. So I know a lot of guys look at it and go, hey man, makes the optic look weird on the rifle. And yeah, it does. But if you're looking for different mount options other than the ones it comes with, then this is a compact ACOG footprint. So there's plenty of QD mounts if you want to go crazy with those. All right, so now we looked at initial mount and profile. We'll take a closer look now at the glass and illumination. All right, fellas, if you remember, PA sources its glass based upon the country manufacturer and designates their products with that nomenclature. So the SLX glass is sourced out of China. It's a lower tier glass. And the GLX glass, which is in the latest Prism, is sourced out of the Philippines. So it's a step up from that. Now, glass quality definitely matters in LPVOs when you look under magnification, so you definitely can tell. But it's been my experience that at 1X, for any type of red dot or 1X sight, you really can't tell just because the emphasis is different and the ranges are shorter. Therefore, when I look at this thing under 1X, it looks clear in the center and you start to push out, there's a bit of distortion toward the edge, maybe the last 20, 25% or so. If you compare that with SLX, pretty much exactly the same thing. So if I were to stack these up side by side or top and bottom, like I could not tell you which one is SLX and which one is the GLX glass. I do want to point out that while you're looking through it at 1X, one of the big changes in the GLX is the redesigned illumination control, which we'll talk about later. In the SLX, if you remember, it kind of had that big rotary knob that kind of stuck out right here. So when it's like up against your face, it was like right in your eye. Your eyes are stereo, so you really only see the shadow of that. So now that they slimmed it down, this sight, whether that big knob, makes it closer to 1X. It adds to the flatter feeling, and that's really what you want in a 1X sight. So having mentioned that, hey, the glass quality really doesn't matter 1X or you can't see it, if we were to put a magnifier behind it, right now I'm using the EOTech 5X because in my opinion, it's probably the best glass quality out there as far as magnifiers, and I've used a bunch of them. So you put a 5X behind it, well, once you start looking through it and compare it to SLX, you can see if you look toward the edges, the SLX is a little bit more warpy. It bends a little bit sooner than the GLX does. So if you're spending a lot of time using the magnifier, I would say really unquestionably the GLX looks a little bit better. It's not like whole world's better, but it does look a little bit better. And I would say, hey, you know, it's better for long range shooting. Okay, so as far as reticle brightness, as I mentioned, the illumination now did get changed, but these are the push buttons now. If you were to look at both of them, to me, the GLX and SLX look about the same as far as brightness wise. There's like no difference between them. At the very top brightness, they are daylight bright, and especially since I'm using the green reticle, it's very easy to see, so you can shoot very fast with it. You can pick up it very easily with the eye. So if you're choosing between them as far as daylight bright, they're both the same. One quick last note about the brightness settings. This does have NV support for night vision, so the night vision settings are the last three, so basically you have to dial all the way down. to the lowest setting, and then you'll see it step through the 3 night vision settings. Well, since this is a push button design versus the rotary knob, you do have to dial all the way down to get to that versus using the rotary knob where you can see the settings easily. All right, fellas, so we'll zoom back out. We'll take a quick look at the controls right now. All right, fellas, so as far as the controls, we'll start with the adjustment turrets. These are unchanged since the SLX, so they still are recessed against the body, so they won't snag and they won't change unless you turn them, right? As far as turning them, they are 0.5 MOA per click, so half an inch at 100 yards, so it's just like an ACOG. However, not like an ACOG. This is probably like my least favorite feature of the Prism sights. Basically, if you want to turn it 2 clicks, if you start turning, it's really easy to turn it 3 clicks or 4 clicks, etc. Like the friction and the tactile control is not like calibrated properly. So it's really easy to overturn it or underturn it. I would say use the turret to just set your initial 0, and once that's done, then don't turn them again. Okay, so as far as the illumination control, as I mentioned earlier, this is redesigned, so no more big stinking knob. Now it's just a flat push button design. The good thing about this is when you're pushing them, they have plenty of clicky tactile feedback, so you know when they've changed. To turn them off, any button to turn on. So the only downside of that is since you don't have a control anymore, you don't know exactly what level it's set to unless you look through the sight. And additionally, you know, a little bit harder to use with gloves because the buttons are smaller. And also, like I mentioned during night vision settings, you got to turn it all the way down before you engage the night vision settings because there's no single NV button. While we're talking illumination, I do want to make one note about the brightness control. The GLX comes with the auto light functionality built in. So basically what that means is, hey, if you're gonna still and you're not using the sight after 2 minutes, which I timed, the sight will shut off to preserve battery life. And it doesn't take much, a little bit of shaking and that sight will come back on. So that's good because, you know, it does help preserve battery life, because if you compare the specs between the SLX and GLX, for some reason the GLX has shorter battery life than the SLX, even though to me the brightness looks the same. I don't know why it has a shorter battery life than it does. It's still plenty good. And last but not least, I want to talk about the diopter. So just like the SLX, you want to use the diopter to tune it in to get as flat a sight picture as possible and as crisp a reticle as possible, since that's a big difference between this sight and a red dot sight. However, if you're using with a magnifier, so now you have a dual purpose in that you have 2 diopters to deal with, one on the Prism and one on the magnifier. I know several guys have posted and also sent me notes that, hey man, I can't get my diopter to work with the Prism and a magnifier combo. So here's what I'll say, based on my experience, is that the diopter that's on the Prism controls the macro, the gross adjustments, so it changes it the most. If you flip this thing in and you're looking through it and you don't even see a reticle, that usually means that the Prism diopter is so turned out that it's completely blurry. So just keep turning the Prism diopter until it starts getting clear. Once it gets within the neighborhood of getting clear, then you can use your magnifier diopter to take you the rest of the way. All right, fellas, so now we've done with controls, let's take a look at how this thing actually works in the field. All right, fellas, so when it comes to in the field use, I think the reticle plays a really important part, whether you're doing a 1X or magnified. So let's take a closer look at it right now. So the GLX uses the same reticle as the previous SLX in that it's an ACSS Cyclops reticle. So there's no change there. Now, if you're using it at 1X, you have 2 things that can help you. Number one, we already mentioned the daylight bright, which really helps you shoot target focused. And the second thing to help is the size and the design of the reticle. And if you were to put it on a target at 10 yards, an IPSC target, you'll see that it roughly covers the A zones. So that's 6 inches from side to side. So basically you could use a circle to help bracket your target if that's the way you shoot. Now, if you move out to 25 yards, you'll see the circle covers basically shoulder to shoulder. So really at that distance, you want to use the center chevron for your aiming scheme. Now, I know a lot of guys don't really like the chevron. I've seen a lot of complaints about it online. But basically, if you look at the chevron as far as the size, it's roughly equivalent to 4 MOA, so it's really like having a dot. And if you look at it within 10 to 25 yards, you can use that chevron to shoot headshots easily. It's got plenty of precision for that. And even at 50 yards, you can use the chevron for any type of precise point that you want, so it's not too big. However, I will say this, if you put a magnifier behind it, let's just say you look at it through your 3X and 5X, you're like, hey, that center chevron looks pretty big. It is pretty big. This reticle does not have traditional BDC lines or dots, etc. Basically, you have to use that big chevron for that. Now, in the primary arms manual, if you look there, it has the chevron and different ammo loads and the recommended zero distances and their associated drops based upon whatever primary arms decided is going to be the barrel length and ammo velocity. I don't know because they don't publish those. Speaking of that, they don't really publish the reticle subtensions either. So how far is it from the top to the bottom of the chevron? I don't know. So basically what you're left with is, hey, I'm just gonna pick a zero that I normally use for my other rifles. In my case, it's 100 yards. I'm gonna zero the tip for 100 yards. I'm just gonna shoot with those holds that they mentioned in the manual and see where it ends up. Now for my setup, this is a 60-inch Criterion barrel. So I'm shooting 69 grain, going about 2,700 or so. And I know how that thing performs at distance. Okay, once I zero to 100, I'm gonna start shooting it from 100 to 400 yards out, which I really think is a limit of this reticle as far as holds. So you look at some of the live fire footage I'm working through here, I'm shooting these small 6-inch rounds from 100 to 200 yards. And you'll notice that the chevron works just fine for that. You know, that tip is very precise. And then once you get to 200 yards, just hold dead on, even though it's a little bit low, it's fine. But once you get 300 yards, usually that's the hold that I dislike the most. So basically, because the reticle is so thick, you have to use the bottom edge in order to be your aiming point. I was able to hit that silhouette no problem, but I don't like it when I can't see the top of that reticle. Now, once I took that 400 yards, typically you have a dot or hash there, but you don't have that in some primary arms case. All you have is to project the lower chevron legs there, and they say, hey, that's the 400 yards. And when I use that as a hold, for sure it hit. So my conclusion is, you know, shooting 69 grain out of this closely matches, or close enough matches what they're saying in the manual for a 16-inch barrel, even though they probably zero that using 55 grain ammo, who knows? Like I said, really, you should probably see subtensions so shooters can find out themselves. And one last note about using this in the field, if you noticed when you're looking at that reticle, the bottom half of the reticle, you have the range stadia. So if you don't know where a target is, just like when ACOG and the chest is exposed to you, you can use that reticle to see how far it is. So it fits within that line. So it goes 200, 300, 400. Testing with my USPSA targets, it was dead on. So that's a very nice feature to have. Really, I wish all magnifiers and reticles had this option. All right, fellas, so what's the final verdict on this Primary Arms GLX 1X Prism? So when it comes to upgrades, I think there are 2 rules to follow. Rule number 1 is, hey, don't step backwards, don't make it any worse. And rule number 2 is you have to add enough features to make it worthwhile to upgrade. So as far as primary arms, I think they achieve number 1 in that the transition between the SLX and GLX, there's definitely not anything worse really, except maybe a little bit worse battery life and it's a tiny bit heavier, but really those aren't big deals. But as far as number 2 and offering a really good reason to upgrade, I don't think they met that threshold, in my opinion. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I said, the features are really nice, you know, especially like the redesigned button and makes it a little bit flatter shooting, which that's really nice. But if you compare them to feature by feature, they're really, really close. So this is really, like I said, a version 2.5. So really that speaks to how well the first, i.e. the Gen 2 was designed. So it kind of makes it hard to prove upon. All right, fellas, so that's the final verdict. Hopefully that helped. If it did, please leave a like and comment. I really appreciate it. This channel is still hanging on. I'll do my best to keep uploading as long as this channel stays alive. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you again next time.